And what you'll be seeing on the film is a combination of those two EVAs, not separated out, and I'll try to point that out as we're going through it.
Okay, good. Let's see if we can watch that.
We launched on November 8th, about 3 months ago today, and here you see the three main engines igniting. They ignite about 6 seconds prior to the solid rockets, which are on either side of the external tank. As you may be aware, we did have a launch delay of approximate 1 day due to high altitude winds because we're concerned about structural damage with those high winds. However, when those solid rockets ignite, you certainly know that you are going somewhere. It's definitely a rattling type ride as you're going, but certainly nothing alarming, and really much smoother than you might expect with that much thrust. There's over 7 million pounds of thrust coming from the combination of the three main engines and the two solid rockets on either side. As you can see, we launched on a cloudy day, and many of my guests said that they weren't able to watch the launch as long as they had on previous missions. This is the trail of smoke that's left behind, and I think it's a good idea that you don't see that from inside the cockpit. We then continue on for 2 minutes, a little over 2 minutes, burning the solid rockets up to about a height of 53 nautical miles. At that point, the solid rockets are jettisoned, and the main engines continue burning for another 6.5 minutes. This is the view that greets you once you're on orbit, and is indeed, as I mentioned, a spectacular view, one that all of us in the astronaut corps feel very privileged to see. Let me just introduce the crew here. This is our commander, Rick Hauk, a Navy captain, and it was a very privilege to work with him. Captain Dave Walker, our pilot, who flew in the right seat. Joe Allen was Mission Specialist 1. Myself, who was a flight engineer on this mission and operated the mechanical arm. Joe Allen, I can mention, was one of the ones who was going to do the spacewalk, and Dale Gardner, also the Mission Specialist 3, who would be participating in the spacewalks that I mentioned. On flight day 3, we deployed the SYNCOM satellite. It is, the orbiter is oriented towards the Earth, and it is ejected from the payload bay in what is called a Frisbee style, which you see here. It's a very large satellite. It's about 13 feet in diameter, 13,000 pounds. It was the first satellite designed specifically to be launched from the Space Transportation System. This is just a spectacular view of the satellite with the Earth in the background, and it was something that we really enjoyed watching, and that satellite's now in orbit working well. This next sequence is to show you a bit about how we live and work in space. This is a view of our checklists. Everything we do on board is written up in checklist style. All of our time of when we're supposed to do things. You see Rick referring to it here. This is Dave in the pilot seat. They're both up on what we call the flight deck, which is where we conduct most of our business. It's much like a conventional airline cockpit. And here you see Dave Walker as he's going down to our living area, which we call the mid-deck. He's floating through the interdeck access. You see the ladder here, which is for use on the ground, actually. We don't really need that ladder since we can float in zero gravity. Here he's floating down. You can see on the lower right of your screen our treadmill that we use to exercise in space. You see foot loops that we use to restrain ourselves when we're trying to get into the lockers. Our lockers, where all of our gear is stowed on board. You can see we've pinned up things from our schools on our lockers. I have some things from UCLA and a picture of my little girl on my locker. Those are our sleep restraints where some of us slept. The thing I looked forward to most, however, was our desserts or snacks during the day. I'd always been known for eating snacks, even though I'm a doctor. And just to show to you that we are in zero-G, you can see this scene here of our we're not supposed to advertise candy-coated chocolates, I can say, which is what our commander used to reward us when we did a good job. You can see that you work hard when you're in space, but you also have time for some fun.
Sure do look a lot like M&Ms.
No comment. Wanted to be sure that Dave got his reward as well. Well, this is a view of the satellite as we've done the rendezvous and we're coming in proximity to it. It's rotating at 2 revolutions per minute, which is the means by which it is stabilized. Rick and I performed did the burns to bring us into proximity with the satellite, and we're very pleased to see that.
When you say burns, what does that mean?
Those are the burns of our orbital maneuvering system, firing of the jets that bring us in proximity with the satellite. The idea then was for Joe or Dale to don this backpack called the Manned Maneuvering Unit, kind of like Buck Rogers, and go out of the payload bay. Meanwhile, Rick and I and Dave were inside doing a lot of work and taking photographs so that you can see them here. Here you see Dale, this is from the West Star retrieval on flight day 7, as he is flying the Manned Maneuvering Unit, and attached to the front of it is the Stinger type device, or Stinger as we called it. And the idea is going to be that he is going to fly over there, and you can see just how smoothly that Manned Maneuvering Unit does fly. And you can see how beautiful it was to watch the world go by as he's doing that.
Now, he's not physically connected to
No
your
tether.
shuttle.
No tether,
No
because
tether, umbilical cord.
that would be dangerous if he were to have a jet fail on and he would be attached. It would whip you around.
I see.
And Rick, of course, is flying the orbiter, keeping us in the right position so that we don't make any contact. You can see the last part of the mechanical robot arm at the lower right hand of the screen that I have put in position, and there's a camera at the end of that that Rick is using during nighttime passes to keep the satellite in view. And here you see Dale as he's about to dock with the satellite with the Stinger to the nozzle end of the satellite as it's rotating at 2 revolutions per minute. The sun is facing into his eyes, and you can see the shadow of the orbiter on the satellite. Meanwhile, we're inside operating the mechanical arm, as I said. Dave Walker is reading off the checklist. Here you see my necklace that my husband designed for me and had made floating, and it was demonstrates again we're in 0 gravity. But meanwhile, work is going on outside. Here you see Dale working to remove the omnidirectional antenna, which needed to be removed from the satellite so that the payload bay doors could be closed. During all this time, we're having to communicate with the ground, let them know what we're doing. And at this point, this is the piece of hardware which did not fit. Up until this point, we had been on our nominal plan as we had trained for hundreds of hours prior to our flight. We reported to the ground that this piece of equipment did not work. And Dale is trying very hard to try to make it work. But at this point, we realized that we're going to have to switch to what we called our Plan Bravo, our backup plan. You can see that I've positioned the satellite with Joe Allen still attached to that Stinger device, and have brought it down into the bay so that Dale could do that work. Well, the backup plan calls for Joe to release from that Stinger so that I can still hold on to the satellite with the mechanical arm, and he's going to fly back to the payload bay and stow the Manned Maneuvering Unit in its stowage location. And I think this is just a particularly beautiful sequence. They're showing how easy it is to fly. The next step, once he has doffed the Manned Maneuvering Unit, I lower that satellite down to him, and he takes it and holds it on the end, as you see him doing here. And Joe Allen, or Mr. Atlas, as we've come to know him, is at this point holding a 1,200-pound satellite. And you can see that that does not prove to be a problem in 0 gravity, because although it is massive, it doesn't weigh anything. And he's moving it out of the way. Dale, meanwhile, has taken the Stinger out of the nozzle end that we've used to grab the satellite initially, and is getting ready to stow it. As I said, inside, we are keeping careful track of the amount of time they're outside, because they only have a limited amount of time in their suits, enough oxygen and other consumables. The next part of the task, Joe lowers the satellite down, and he's now going to put another piece of hardware, which we call the adapter, onto the nozzle end again, because that is the part of the satellite that is strongest, because we now need to figure out some way to lock that satellite into the payload bay. Here you see he's inserted the adapter and is now using an fairly ordinary torque wrench to fasten 9 fasteners which hold the adapter in place on the satellite. He is then, as you see here, he is now holding that combination of satellite and adapter and that all weighs approximately 1 ton. And you can see how easy he is able to handle that mass in the weightless environment of space. And then we were able to berth the satellites, and at that point, after we've recovered the second satellite, we took this for sale sign, because indeed this has been a spectacular mission for the underwriters. Each of those satellites worth $30 million. Finally, on Flight Day 9, we're going to land at the Kennedy Space Center. After spending Flight Day 8 packing up and cleaning up ship, we were fortunate to have good weather that morning, and here you see the shuttle as it's descending.
What's it feel like riding in that compared to an airplane, for instance?
At this point, from inside, it doesn't feel much different. Dave lowers the landing gear at 200 feet, which is definitely different than a commercial airline. Here you see a view from behind as the shuttle's about to touch down, and the crew was all very grateful to our commander, Captain Hout, for the very smooth landing that he performed. The nose starts rotating at about 180 knots and touches down at about 160. The entire rollout distance from touchdown to wheel stop was about 9,000 feet, around 2 miles.
That's a fascinating picture, and after you look at a picture like that, you have to wonder whether the future is now rather than out there somewhere. If you could project, just from your own experience, 10 years from now, where do you think the space program will be with respect to the shuttle or other missions? What types of things do you envision us doing in space?
Well, certainly the next step, the one that those of us in the astronaut corps really look forward to, and all of NASA for that matter, is building of a space station. I think that's our next logical step of what we'd like to do, and certainly President Reagan has shown a commitment to that area. And that I think is a very realistic goal. Technically we can do that, and I think we'll have a space station by the early 1990s. So the next 10 years, I think that's our next major step.
As a doctor, you're somewhat unique being an astronaut with that type of background. What type of special qualities does a space atmosphere give us for advances in medicine? Are there certain things that we can develop there that we cannot develop as well on Earth?
Well, there certainly are certain biological materials that we're looking at developing. McDonnell Douglas, in conjunction with Johnson & Johnson, has flown an electrophoresis experiment on some of the previous flights, and we'll be flying again on a flight, I think 2 flights from now. And they're looking at using zero gravity to produce larger quantities and pure quantities of certain biological materials that can be used to treat diseases such as diabetes, for instance. And I think there's a great future in that area. Then again, as I said, in the space station world, I think there's just a whole area of research that's yet untapped. I think there's a whole new field of medicine, space medicine, if you will, that we will be able to look forward to doing research. If you walk into a intensive care unit now and look at all that equipment for monitoring critically ill patients, all of that is directly from the space program. Certainly things that we had not anticipated getting when we started out, for instance, in Gemini and Apollo. Originally, they were just trying to monitor the astronauts. And I think in the same way, as we go into a space station era, there are going to be things that we can't even predict now that will come back to benefit us here on Earth.
You might be thought of as something of the new generation of astronauts. That sounds even funny to say that, since we haven't had astronauts that long. But you're trained as a medical doctor. You're also a mother. Your husband's also an astronaut. Is that the way you envisioned your life when you were in high school in San Pedro?
Oh, not at all. I can remember, as a matter of fact, one specific day when I was a candy striper, volunteer worker at Harbor General Hospital, where I thought of being an astronaut and confided it to one of my fellow volunteers who thought I was crazy. And but it was more in light of a dream. You know, it wasn't a realistic goal. And as I got older and was making realistic decisions about my career, I always loved science, and I loved working with people, and medicine seemed like a good way to blend those two. I had always been interested in the space program, but I didn't know how to marry the 3 of those interests, and suddenly this opportunity came along for mission specialist astronauts, and I had the qualifications. But certainly when I was in high school, that was not something that I thought of as a realistic goal.
You've been quoted as saying that, I like adventure, but more important is finding something you can give your whole life to and be willing to die for if you have to. Have you found that?
Yeah, that's how I feel about the space program.
What would you say to someone who's in high school now, who is having the same thoughts and dreams you had at a similar period of time in your life about the possibilities for space, boy or girl, in different types of programs? What would you say to them?
I would tell them that I think it's a fantastic career. It's intellectually challenging, physically challenging. You get to do a lot of different things. There are some things that you don't have control over, however, your own health, for instance. There are certain medical reasons why you can't be selected as an astronaut. So if you take some young person who their entire life is geared towards just being an astronaut, they might wind up being disappointed because of something beyond their control. So the thing I generally tell young people is that I highly recommend it as a career field, but to always be doing something that you enjoy, whether you've chosen to be a pilot astronaut and go into flight training, or whether you've chosen to, as I have, a doctor. There are people in the astronaut corps who are astronomers, engineers, geologists. Pick an area that you really enjoy, independent of your interest in space, because there's going to be an application for virtually every area. But you need to also just keep in the back of your mind that, you know, that there are things that can prevent you from getting to do that.
As you know, NASA has extended an invitation to certain members of Congress to do it. Some of the wags in Washington have suggested that just proves if they can do it, anybody can be an astronaut. Maybe we'll do something more than prove that, but it does show that we've expanded the definition of astronauts, and that the possibilities for a lot of young people who perhaps in past years did not have a specific goal or career path that would normally take them into what would be thought of as the proper one for an astronaut. Maybe they can do that now. As I mentioned before, your husband's an astronaut. Is there any opportunity or possibility in the future for a mission in which you'd both be on board?
Well, we certainly wouldn't refuse it. We both have had similar interests and enjoy working together, but I'm afraid that I don't have control over that area. At the moment, he's scheduled for a flight in June, and I'm really looking forward to supporting him as much as he supported me. We certainly wouldn't mind having an opportunity to fly together, but whether our superiors have that in mind, I really have no idea.
Now, what's his professional background?
He's also a medical doctor, emergency medicine. Our interests have been very parallel.
How many physicians are there in the overall astronaut program?
I think there's about 7 or 8.
And are there some unique things that you bring to the program? In other words, do you, because of your medical background, have an ability to carry out certain missions that others would not?
Usually when there's a physician on board a flight, we conduct medical experiments of a variety of nature. On my particular flight, because we had a problem with our center of gravity and we were not wanting to carry too much equipment forward in the middeck, we did not do any. But for instance, there is a Space Lab mission scheduled in early 1986, which is totally dedicated to life sciences experiments. And indeed, physicians from the office are selected for that flight. And I'm sure we'll be doing a lot more of that. In general, when a physician is on board a flight, you not only care for your fellow members, you do experiments.
Now, I mentioned before that you returned to your hometown, San Pedro. They had a day for you and so forth. What kind of feelings did that engender in you at the time? And was there anything that surprised you in particular about that visit?
I was very surprised by the warmth and just genuine pride that I sensed from the people, the community of San Pedro. I feel very strongly about the education I received being the key to being ready to take advantage of unexpected opportunities. I had many teachers that were encouraging to me, and it was really a privilege to be able to, in some small way, come back and say thank you to the people that helped me. I was surprised by the reception at the high school, where they did a cheer that some of the cheerleaders had written, and was very touched by that. And then at the, excuse me, the junior high school, the young people had designed a satellite that came down. I never got to see it because I was behind it, but it came down from the stage, and then the principal and I walked out. But it was just the the real enthusiasm and the attentiveness that the students showed me. They were all very quiet as I talked with them and were genuinely interested, and I really appreciated that response.
Now, I know you don't want to get into questions that are of a political nature, but let me ask it this way. We're going through a whole bunch of decisions on the budget and so forth, and we have to review every program for its worthiness. Doesn't matter what the final decision is going to be with respect to spending. What would you say to someone who said that we've done what we wanted to do in space? We've gone to the moon. We've proved we can have a shuttle. It's time to really, really slow down because there's not that need to do that now.
Well, I guess I disagree quite strongly with that feeling. I think that if you look at NASA's record, that's probably the one agency that really gives people a lot for their money. I understand, you know, that we are going to have to cut back, and I understand the budget problems, and certainly don't think that NASA should perhaps be an exception when every agency is having to face tough budgetary decisions. But I think that I have the opportunity to go speak with many people throughout the United States, and I can honestly say I have never had, well, maybe one, but really have not had negative comments. I think that the grassroots support for the space program is really there. I think people, it demonstrates what we've done with the space shuttle and going to the moon, demonstrates what we as Americans can do in our society, and I think people are proud of it. And I think we also get a lot of spin-offs from it, but I don't think that is necessarily the biggest one. The pride that we feel in our accomplishments, I think, is a very significant part of it.
You know, some people have said that all frontiers are conquered now. There are no more things for us to reach out to. We're in this tremendous era of limits. We ought to learn to live with it. I think one of the real lessons we ought to learn is that any society that has been on the forefront of leadership has been the one that's reached out and looked at those frontiers, whether it was the old world coming to the new world, or whether it's space now. And as long as our country is going to be in a leadership position, at least in my judgment, space has got to be that frontier. We can't give it up if we want to be that dynamic society that we've been for so long. We could really go on for hours and hours about this. We just touched the surface, but our time's up. I want to thank you for taking the time to be with you. It's been a real pleasure. And I want to thank everyone who took the time to be with us here today. I hope that you will join us again next time at the same time.
This has been the Dan Lungren Report. If you have any questions or comments